There is a farm printed on the packet of meat in your fridge right now. It has a name that sounds like it has been there for 200 years. There is probably a small illustration next to it, a gate, a hedgerow, a hill. Everything about that packet is asking you to picture a place. So picture it, and then try to go there. You can't because it isn't a place. It is a word chosen in a marketing meeting, tested against other words, and printed onto plastic film because it made people in a focus group feel something. But here is what turns this from irritating into genuinely strange. Some of those invented farm names are real farms. Real land, real families, real gates you could actually drive to. And the people who own them found out that their family's name was on supermarket meat when somebody sent them a photograph of a packet. One of them, a man who owns an actual Boswell Farm, called it an abuse of power. He said that even if it wasn't strictly illegal, they were trying to conjure up an image of something that isn't the reality. The man who owns an actual Woodside Farm found that the same name, his name on his gate, was appearing on meat that had not come from Britain at all. Neither of them was asked, neither of them was paid. Neither of them had any say in it whatsoever. Today we open the third page of the ledger, and this one is different from the first two. On day 1 we proved your dairy was a clone. On day 2 we proved your pantry was a co-packed illusion. In both cases the deception was passive. The packaging simply declined to tell you something true. This is not that. This is the assertion of something false. A supermarket did not merely fail to tell you where your chicken came from. It manufactured an entire fictional place for it to have come from, gave that place a name, gave it a font, gave it a little drawing of a barn, and sold it to you at a premium because you wanted to support British farmers. And I'm going to show you the specific names, the specific launch date, the 3 companies that actually produce almost all of it, the exact legal mechanism that makes every word of it lawful, and, most importantly, the 4 words on a meat label that genuinely mean something, so that after today you can walk into any supermarket in this country and read a packet of chicken correctly in about 9 seconds. There is also one number in this story that I want you to hold on to, because when I explain it near the end, it will change how you read the word British for the rest of your life. It is not a big number. It is a very small one, and it is the reason this all still works. Let's start with the day it launched. March 2016. One of Britain's largest supermarkets introduced 7 new brands across its fresh food aisles simultaneously. Not a slow rollout. 7 at once. Rosedene Farms for fruit, Boswell Farms for beef, Willow Farms for chicken, Nightingale Farms for salad, Redmere Farms for field vegetables, Woodside Farms for pork, and Suntrail Farms for imported fruit, lemons, oranges, the citrus that has never grown commercially in this country and never will. There was an 8th in the same family, Bay Fishmongers, for fish. Because if you are going to invent a countryside, you may as well invent a harbour to go with it. Now sit with the construction of those names for a second because they are not random. Rosedene, Nightingale, Willow, Redmere. Every one of them is a soft consonant and a natural noun. There is not a hard sound among them. No numbers, no compass points, no industrial estates, no counties. They are the vocabulary of a children's picture book, and that is not an accident. That is a specification. Somebody was briefed to produce names that felt English, old, small, and warm, and somebody delivered. And the thing that makes it work is the plural. Willow Farms, Boswell Farms, not Willow Farm, singular, which would be a claim about one specific place that could be checked. Farms, plural, implies a network, a cooperative, a group of independent families who have banded together, which is precisely the image the British shopper has been trained to reward. It is an enormous amount of emotional work performed by a single letter S, and then the real farmers found out. Because some of those names exist, there is a real Boswell Farm. There is a real Woodside Farm. There are Rosedenes and Willows scattered across the British countryside on gates and letterheads and village signs belonging to people who have farmed there for generations. And they discovered that their name, the one on their planning applications, the one their grandparents put on a sign, was now a supermarket brand, printed on meat they had never seen, from animals they had never raised. The owner of the real Woodside Farm raised a point that I think is the sharpest in this entire story. His concern was not simply that his name had been borrowed. It was that the same storybook British name was appearing on meat that had come from elsewhere. The pork sold under that farm name included meat from the UK and from other European countries. The country of origin was disclosed, and it was there in small print because the law requires it. But the name on the front of the pack, the name in the largest type, the name your eye lands on first, was doing something the small print could not undo. And Suntrail Farms is the one that gives the whole game away because Suntrail Farms sells imported fruit. It was designed from the beginning to sell things that were never British. It has the same warm, hedgerow-sounding construction as the others, Suntrail Farms, and it is a name for produce grown thousands of miles away. That tells you the names were never meant to communicate origin. They were meant to communicate feeling. Now, I need 30 seconds before we get to where the meat actually comes from, because this next part is the hardest research I have done for this channel. The Food Ledger UK is new. It exists because none of this is secret and almost none of it is findable. Everything you are hearing today came from company filings, supplier registers, consumer group testing, government consultations, parliamentary research briefings, and industry trade press. All public, all free, all completely impenetrable unless somebody sits down and reads it for a week. That is what this channel is. I am trying to get to 5,000 subscribers. Not 100,000, 5,000. That is the point at which this becomes sustainable enough to keep doing properly instead of squeezing it around everything else. So if what you have heard in the last 8 minutes has changed how you are going to look at a packet of chicken, press subscribe. It costs you nothing and it is the entire difference between this continuing and this quietly stopping. 5,000. Then stay with me because now we find out who actually raises the birds. Here is the answer, and it is smaller than you think. The overwhelming majority of the chicken sold in British supermarkets comes from 3 companies. Not 300, not 30, 3. Their names are Two Sisters Food Group, Moy Park, and Avara Foods. That is the finding of consumer group testing on supermarket chicken labelling, and it is not seriously disputed by anyone inside the industry, because within the industry it is simply how the sector is structured. Take Willow Farms, the chicken brand. The chicken sold under that name is supplied by Avara Foods. Avara is not a farm. Avara is a joint venture unveiled in January 2018 between Faxenda, a long-established British poultry business, and Cargill, one of the largest privately held agricultural corporations on Earth. It became that supermarket's biggest chicken supplier, taking over the position from Two Sisters. So the label says Willow Farms. The reality is a joint venture between a British poultry group and an American commodity giant, operating at industrial scale across multiple sites. And I want to be careful and fair here because this matters. None of that is illegal. None of it is even unusual, producing chicken at the volume. Britain Eats It genuinely does require industrial infrastructure. You cannot feed 60-odd million people from small holdings, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling a fantasy. The problem is not that Avara exists. The problem is that you were shown a willow tree. And the gap between the willow tree and the reality is currently being argued in the High Court. In the autumn of 2025, a claim was filed on behalf of more than 4,500 residents and businesses over pollution of the rivers Wye, Lug and Usk. The defendants named are Avara Foods, another poultry company, and Welsh Water. The allegation concerns runoff carrying phosphorus, nitrogen and bacteria from poultry manure spread on farmland alongside sewage discharges. The solicitors bringing it describe it as the largest domestic environmental pollution claim ever brought in this country. The first hearing was listed for the 27th of April 2026. I want to be precise about this because precision is the point of this channel. Those are allegations. All 3 defendants deny them. Nothing has been determined by any court, and it may be years before anything is. I'm not telling you a company is guilty of something. I am telling you that the actual contested real-world story of British supermarket chicken is a multi-thousand claimant High Court case about river catchments. And the word printed on the packet is willow. Let me give you the scale, because scale is what the name is there to hide. More than 1.1 billion chickens went through Britain's commercial meat and egg production cycle in a single recent year. 1.1 billion. That is roughly 16 birds for every person in this country, every year. And a broiler chicken, a bird raised for meat, is typically slaughtered at 42 days old. 6 weeks. From egg to packet in 6 weeks. I want you to hold those 2 numbers together for a moment because that is the actual production system. 1.1 billion animals, most reaching the end of their lives at 6 weeks, moving through the facilities of a small number of very large companies. That is what is behind the drawing of the barn. Consumer testing found something else worth knowing. One supermarket range used packaging imagery that suggested outdoor rearing, the visual language of a bird walking around in daylight. The birds in question had space equivalent to a sheet of A4 paper. A sheet of A4. That is the image I cannot get out of my head, because it is so easy to check. Take a piece of printer paper out of your printer. Put it on the table. That is the footprint. And on the front of the pack was a picture of a field. And here is the thing that makes that legal. The words used on those packs to imply high standards frequently have no legal definition at all. Phrases like trusted farms, or high welfare standards, or carefully selected sound like they are certifications. They are not. They are adjectives. There is no register you can check them against, no auditor who signs them off, no threshold anybody has to meet, because the phrase does not mean anything in law. It is a decoration. Now let me show you what has happened to the actual British countryside underneath all this pastoral packaging, because this is the part that made me genuinely angry. In the 1970s, the United Kingdom had around 2,500 abattoirs, slaughterhouses spread across the country, mostly small, mostly local, serving the farms around them. As of 2025, there are 203, 2,500 down to 203. That is a decline of more than 90%. That figure comes from work by the Sustainable Food Trust, the Soil Association, and the Rare Breed Survival Trust, based on a survey of more than 850 farmers and land managers. In that survey, a third of them said their local abattoir had closed within the previous 5 years. A quarter said their nearest facility was too busy to take their animals. 1 in 10 said they now travel more than 60 miles to reach one at all. Think about what that means for the thing the packaging is selling you. The image on the front is a small local farm supplying local meat. The reality is that the infrastructure which makes small local meat physically possible has collapsed by 90% inside 2 generations. If you are a genuine small farmer with 15 animals and your nearest abattoir is 60 miles away and fully booked, the route to a supermarket shelf is effectively closed to you. So the invented farm brand is not just decorative. It occupies the exact space in your imagination that real small farms used to occupy. And it does so at the precise moment those farms are being squeezed out of the supply chain that the brand is pretending to represent. Now, this is the point in the video where I want you to do something, and I mean actually do it. Go to your fridge tonight, take out every packet of meat in it, and read 3 things on each one: the brand name on the front, the reared-in line, and the slaughtered-in line. Then come into the comments and tell me exactly what you found, the brand, the 2 countries, and whether they matched. Don't tell me a supermarket is evil. Tell me what was printed. I read these comments properly. Last video, people sent in code comparisons from real shelves, and several of them went into my notes for this one. If a few thousand of you do this, we end up with something that does not currently exist anywhere in public. A crowd-built picture of what British supermarket meat labels actually say, as opposed to what they imply. And answer me one more thing while you're there, because I want to know if it's just me. Have you ever bought a specific product purely because the brand name sounded local? Not because of price, not because of quality, just because the word felt like somewhere. I have, repeatedly. Say yours. Right. Now the legal machinery. This is the number I told you to hold on to. Under British law, fresh, chilled and frozen meat from pigs, sheep, goats and poultry must carry 2 separate statements when it is sold to you. Not 1. 2, it must say reared in followed by a country. And it must say slaughtered in followed by a country. It must also carry a reference or batch code that identifies the animal or the group of animals. And that requirement runs the whole way along the chain, from the slaughterhouse to the shelf. That is a genuinely good law, and almost nobody uses it because almost nobody knows those 2 lines are different lines. Most people read the flag on the front and stop. But now here is the mechanism. The law has to define what reared in actually means because animals move. So it sets a residency period, a length of time the animal must have spent in a country for that country to be named as where it was reared. For pigs slaughtered at over 6 months old, the qualifying period is the last 4 months. For sheep and goats over 6 months old, it is the last 6 months. For poultry, the qualifying period is the last 1 month. 1 month, 30 days. And remember what I told you earlier, a broiler chicken is typically slaughtered at 42 days old. Take a moment with that. If a bird lives 42 days in total, and the country of rearing is determined by where it spent its final month, then the label describes roughly the last 30 of its 42 days. The rule is not a scandal in itself. It exists for sound practical reasons, and for the great majority of British chicken, the bird genuinely was hatched and raised here throughout. But it does mean that the word British in the specific case of poultry is a much shorter word than you assumed it was. It is not a claim about a lifetime. It is a claim about a window. And then there is the second mechanism, which is bigger. Those origin rules, the reared-in and slaughtered-in requirements, apply to fresh, chilled and frozen meat. They do not apply to meat-containing products. Processed products are governed by a different set of rules entirely. So, a pork chop must tell you where the pig was reared and where it was slaughtered. A pie, a sausage, a ready meal, a breaded escalope, a pack of bacon. These fall into a different regime. That is where the flags live. When the government opened its consultation on food labelling on the 12th of March 2024, it named this problem directly. The example it used was pork imported into the UK, cured here into bacon, and sold in packaging carrying a Union Jack. Every part of that is lawful. The flag is not lying about anything the flag is legally required to describe. It is simply positioned where your eye will read it as an origin claim, on a product category where the origin claim you are imagining does not have to be made. The consultation ran for 8 weeks and closed on the 7th of May 2024. Among the things it proposed, making country of origin more visible in larger text on the front of the pack, and introducing a mandatory 5-tier method of production label for pork, chicken and eggs, a scale that would show whether a product was made to standards that meet, exceed or fall below British animal welfare rules. Which tells you something important. The government's own labelling consultation identified in writing that shoppers currently cannot distinguish between products made to different standards. That is not an activist claim. That is the department responsible for food describing the system it oversees. So what actually means something? Because I promised you this, and it is the most useful 90 seconds of the video. Consumer group testing identified 4 labels on British meat that carry real, auditable standards behind them, as opposed to marketing adjectives. 4. Red Tractor, RSPCA Assured, Free Range, Organic. Those 4 are schemes with published standards and inspection regimes behind them. They are not all equally demanding. The standards vary considerably between them, and Red Tractor is a baseline assurance scheme rather than a high welfare guarantee, which is a distinction a lot of shoppers do not realise. But they are real. Somebody has written down what the requirement is, and somebody goes and checks. Everything else, every farm name, every trusted, every specially selected, every our finest, every picture of a hedgerow, is decoration. It is not lying to you because it is not making a claim that could be false. It is making no claim at all, in language engineered to feel like one. That is the trick, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The most emotionally powerful words on a packet of British meat are precisely the words that mean nothing, and the words that mean something are printed in the smallest type on the back. Now, why does this work on us so completely? Because it is worth understanding that you are not stupid. You were studied. Consider one of the most revealing admissions in this entire field from a completely different retailer and a completely different product. A premium chain sells Scottish smoked salmon under a place name that sounds unmistakably like a Highland loch. It is not a loch. There is no such place. And back in 2006, the company explained quite openly that the name had been chosen by a panel of consumers because it had the most Scottish resonance. Read that phrase again. Scottish resonance, not Scottish origin. Not Scottish provenance. Resonance. The name was selected the way a focus group selects a paint colour. The same chain sells chicken under a name that sounds like an English market town. And this is not one company. Once you know the pattern, you find it in nearly every aisle of every major grocer. One discounter sells meat under a name built from a tree and a field. Another sells meat under one invented estate-sounding name in England and Wales and a different Scottish-sounding invented name in Scotland, because the emotional trigger has to be localised to be effective. That is not a supply chain decision. There is no reason the meat itself changes at the border. That is a linguistics decision. And here is what tells you the industry knows exactly what it is doing. When it got called out, some of them folded immediately. One major supermarket publicly pledged to stop the practice and to use only genuine place names. One discounter dropped a fictional farm name from its fresh produce and replaced it with a straightforwardly descriptive one. And when one of those chains surveyed the public about it in 2017, 70% of adults said they objected to fictitious farm brands and wanted real names used instead. 70%. Again, a saint. And the practice continued anyway at other chains because 70% of people objecting in a survey is not the same as 70% of people changing what they put in the trolley. And the industry knows the difference between those two numbers better than we do. Which brings me to the part I find hardest to explain away. That original set of 7 farm brands launched in March 2016. There was a wave of coverage. Real farmers came forward. There were referrals to trading standards, legal threats, campaign groups, a decade of intermittent outrage, a national broadcaster running segments on it as recently as a couple of years ago, and a whole coined word for the practice, farmwashing. And you can still buy the chicken. Today, it is on the shelf and on the website. 10 years on, that name is still selling chicken in Britain, and the fact that all of us know it is invented has changed absolutely nothing about its commercial performance. That is the real finding of this video. Not that supermarkets invented farms, that story is a decade old. The finding is that exposure did not work. Awareness did not work. Outrage did not work. The brand survived a decade of people knowing, which means the mechanism it exploits is not ignorance. It is that in the 4 seconds you spend in front of a chiller cabinet, with a family to feed and a budget that has been squeezed for years, a warm word does something a cold fact cannot undo. You know, Willow Farms is not a farm. You reach for it anyway because the alternative is a packet that offers you nothing at all to feel, and feeling nothing about the food you give your children is genuinely unpleasant. They are not selling you a lie. They are selling you a small piece of relief. And that has turned out to be almost completely immune to being exposed. So let me give you the thing that does work, because it is not a boycott and it is not outrage. It is 9 seconds and a habit. When you pick up any packet of fresh meat, ignore the front entirely. Ignore the name, ignore the illustration, ignore the flag. Turn it over. Find the reared-in line. Find the slaughtered-in line. If both say the same country, you have a straightforward answer. If they say different countries, you have just learned something the front of the pack was arranged so that you would not ask. Then look for one of the 4. Red Tractor, RSPCA Assured, Free Range, Organic. If none of them is there, then whatever the front of the pack made you feel, no independent standard is standing behind it. And if the product is processed, a pie, a sausage, a ready meal, bacon, remember that the origin rules you just used do not apply in the same way. That is the category where a flag is doing the most work and carrying the least obligation. 9 seconds, 2 lines and 4 words. That is the whole method, and it works in every supermarket in this country, on every packet, forever. Which leaves one loose end, and it has been bothering me since I started this. We have now been through the dairy, the pantry, and the meat. And in all 3 cases, the deception operated on a product where you have no way to judge the thing itself. You cannot tell the age of butter by looking at it. You cannot see a factory through a tin. You cannot inspect a chicken's life through cling film. The packaging fills a gap in your knowledge. But there is one aisle in the supermarket where you can see the product. Completely. Unwrapped, unlabeled, held in your own hand and inspected from every angle before you buy it. The fruit and vegetable aisle. The fresh aisle. The one part of the shop where the marketing seems irrelevant because the apple is right there and you can look at it. So answer me this. How old is that apple? Not the best before date. Not when it arrived at the store. How long has it been since that apple was actually attached to a tree? Because there is a storage technology used across the entire global fruit trade. It is not a secret, it is not illegal, and the industry discusses it openly in its own trade literature, which allows certain fruits to be held in a suspended state for months. Not days, months. And in some cases, the answer to how old is that apple is measured not in weeks, but in the better part of a year. There is no law requiring the shelf to tell you which. The word fresh has no legal definition attached to a length of time. And that apple looks to your eye exactly like one picked last week, because keeping it looking exactly like one picked last week is the entire purpose of the technology. That is the next page of the ledger. How old your fresh food actually is, how it is kept in that condition, which items in your trolley are most likely to be from last year's harvest, and the one thing you can check yourself to get a real answer. Before then, go and do the fridge test. Turn every packet of meat you own over and read the 2 lines. Bring me what you find. And when you next stand in front of a chiller cabinet and something inside you reaches for the packet with the willow tree on it, notice that you are doing it. That is the whole thing. You don't have to resist it. Just notice it. Because the name was chosen for you. By people who tested it first. The food ledger is open.